Howard Fisher discovered he was worth exactly 67 cents per pound. He'd calculated it once in '76 while eating lunch on the steel girder overlooking the Clyde Avenue plant floor. 34 years old, 212 pounds, 43 grand a year after overtime. He'd scratched the math onto his sandwich wrapper with a stubby pencil. 67 cents per pound of Howard Fisher. The math had made him laugh then. It didn't make him laugh now. April 17, 1980. Howard stared at the television, where a man in an expensive suit explained why General Motors was shutting down the Cleveland casting plant. 2,000 jobs gone. Just like that. They're saying it's temporary, his wife, Audrey, said from the kitchen doorway. Her voice tight with the lie they both recognized. Howard nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. Temporary, he repeated. The word felt hollow in his mouth, like biting into something that should be solid but isn't. The casting plant was just the beginning. Within 6 months, 35,000 auto industry jobs would vanish from Cleveland. The city that built America's cars was watching its economic engine seize up in real time. Howard had spent 16 years at the Fisher Body plant on Coit Road, installing door panels with mechanical precision that had earned him the nickname Stopwatch from the guys on the line. His father had worked there before him. His grandfather had helped build the original plant. 3 generations of Fishers making Chevys and Buicks, turning Cleveland steel into American dreams. The work had shaped Howard, literally. His right shoulder sat permanently lower than his left from years of torquing bolts at the same angle. The skin on his hands was a topography of tiny scars and calluses, each one a record of time served. 16 years, he thought. And what did I get for it? They're saying Ford's next, said Audrey, crossing her arms. Her nails were bitten to the quick, flecks of her secretarial typing job's white correction fluid still visible at the edges. Howard didn't answer. The thought of Ford closing too made his stomach acid rise. The reporter cut to footage of workers exiting the Coit Road plant. Howard recognized Mike Denton's walk before he saw his face. He'd stood next to Mike for 12 years. The camera lingered on Mike's expression, confusion mixed with betrayal, like a child who's been struck without warning. Something inside Howard's chest squeezed tight. They'll call us back, he said, with a certainty he didn't feel. They always do. Audrey didn't contradict him. That was worse, somehow. The next morning, Howard drove to work as usual, passing the Cleveland casting plant on his way. The parking lot was half empty, the smokestacks idle. An unnatural quiet hung over the massive complex. He tried not to look, keeping his eyes forward, but the emptiness pulled at his attention like a physical force. At Fisher Body, the mood was funeral quiet. Men who normally joked and roughhoused moved through their morning routines in silence. Howard nodded to Emil at the time clock. Heard anything? Emil asked, punching his card. Just what's on the news, Howard replied. Emil's face hardened. My brother-in-law at casting says they're lying. Says it's permanent. Howard felt a chill run through him, but shook his head. Casting's different. Outdated equipment. We just retooled last year. Emil just looked at him, pity in his eyes. Howard wanted to punch him. 2 weeks later, the plant manager called an all-hands meeting. Howard stood shoulder to shoulder with 400 other men in the cavernous lunchroom, the smell of machine oil and cigarettes and fear filling the space. The announcement came with corporate euphemisms: production slowdown, market adjustment, temporary workforce reduction. But the meaning was clear enough. By June, the Fisher Body plant would go from 2 shifts to 1. Half the men in the room would be laid off. Howard's union seniority would keep him employed, for now. The knowledge brought no relief, just a guilty heaviness as he looked at younger guys like Tommy Reese, who'd just had a second kid and bought a house in Parma. That evening, driving home through Collinwood, Howard noticed the changed landscape for the first time. The neighborhood had grown up around the auto plants. Now for rent signs hung in windows. A corner bar where workers used to crowd 3 deep at shift change stood nearly empty. Audrey was waiting when he got home, tension visible in the tight line of her shoulders. My cousin Alice called, she said. Alan was let go today. Howard nodded, hanging his jacket by the door. Alan Nash worked at the Coit Road plant too, had for 20 years. She said he just sat in the driveway for an hour. Wouldn't come inside. Howard could picture it. Alan in his Buick, staring at the garage door, unable to walk into his house and say the words. What are we going to do? Audrey asked, her voice small. Howard moved past her to the refrigerator, pulled out a beer. I've still got my job. For how long? The question hung between them. Howard had no answer. By August, Howard was one of the lucky ones. Still employed while Cleveland hemorrhaged auto jobs. Republic Steel had laid off workers. So had Ford. The wave was sweeping through the industrial heart of the city, each closure triggering another, dominoes falling in slow motion. The survivors on Howard's line worked with a desperate intensity, as if their productivity might save them. Howard found himself counting parts, tracking his output with obsessive precision. 212 door panels installed per shift, each one perfect, each one proof of his value. But the math was relentless. Orders down 60%, parts inventory backing up. The future written in cold numbers that didn't care about Howard Fisher or his 16 years on the line. The plant manager's second announcement came in September. Complete shutdown by December. The remaining jobs transferring to a facility in Mexico. Howard drove home in a fog that day, nearly missing his exit off the Memorial Shoreway. The late summer light glinted off Lake Erie, the water steely blue and vast. He pulled over at Gordon Park and sat watching the waves. His father had taken him fishing here as a boy. Cleveland makes things, son, his father had said, gesturing to the industrial skyline. Real things that matter. You be part of that, you'll never want for work. Howard lowered his head to the steering wheel and closed his eyes. He didn't tell Audrey that night, or the next. He went to work, punched his card, installed his door panels with the same precision. But each movement felt like a lie, a pantomime of purpose. The third night, sitting at the kitchen table while Audrey washed dishes, he finally said it. Plant's closing. December. The plate in Audrey's hand slipped, clattering in the sink, but not breaking. She didn't turn around. What about transfers? She asked, her voice controlled. Mexico, he said, the word bitter on his tongue. She nodded, shoulders rigid, and resumed washing. Later that night, Howard lay awake, listening to Audrey's measured breathing beside him. Not asleep, just pretending. Like they were both pretending everything would be okay. The unemployment office on Payne Avenue was a sea of familiar faces. Men Howard had worked with, had drinks with, had known for years. All of them now clutching the same forms, waiting in the same lines, avoiding each other's eyes. Fisher. Hey, stopwatch. Howard turned to see Mike Denton waving from across the crowded room. Mike looked smaller somehow, diminished in regular clothes instead of his work uniform. How long you been out? Mike asked when Howard made his way over. 3 weeks, Howard answered. Mike nodded. 4 months for me. You getting any bites? Howard shook his head. He'd applied to every manufacturing job in a 50-mile radius. Nothing. I'm heading down to Texas next week, Mike said. My cousin says they're hiring in the oil fields. Good money. Howard tried to picture Mike Denton in Texas. The image wouldn't form. What about your house? Dorothy's mother. Mike looked away. Bank's taking the house. Dorothy's brother is moving her mother to Cincinnati. He paused. Sometimes you gotta know when to fold, Fisher. Howard thought about his own mortgage. 3 missed payments already. The certified letters from the bank that Audrey placed unopened on the counter. Cleveland will come back, Howard said. The words automatic, a reflex. Always does. Mike's expression was the same one Audrey wore lately when Howard talked about finding another job in the plants. That mixture of pity and impatience. Sure, stopwatch, Mike said, clapping him on the shoulder. Sure it will. November brought the first snow and the final shutdown of the Fisher body plant. Howard stood in the parking lot after the last shift, watching the men disperse to their cars. 16 years of his life contained within those brick walls. Now just another empty building in a city full of them. Emil approached, breath clouding in the cold. Some of us are heading to McGinty's. Last hurrah. Howard nodded but didn't move toward his car. You coming? Emil asked. In a bit, Howard said. After Emil left, Howard walked back to the building. The side door was still unlocked. Inside, the plant was silent, the machine still. Howard walked his old route to the assembly line, muscle memory guiding him through the darkened space. At his station, he ran his hand over the pneumatic drill hanging from its balance arm. How many times had he lifted this tool? Hundreds of thousands. Millions, maybe. The motion as natural as breathing. Howard sat on his stool and closed his eyes, listening to the silence. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the truth he'd been avoiding. This was never coming back. Not just his job. Not just this plant, but all of it. The entire world he had built his life around. The Cleveland of steady manufacturing jobs and lifelong security was gone. Howard Fisher, 38 years old, 212 pounds, worth exactly nothing per pound now. He opened his eyes and stood up. Then, deliberately, he removed his work gloves from his back pocket and hung them on the drill handle. A small funeral ritual for a life that was over. Outside in the parking lot, snow was falling steadily, already covering the tracks of the men who had left. Howard brushed accumulation from his windshield, the snow cold against his bare hands. He drove not to McGinty's, but to the community college on the east side. The building was mostly dark, but the admissions office showed lights. Howard sat in his car, engine running, heater blasting, staring at the entrance. Audrey had left a brochure on the kitchen table a week ago. Computer programming courses. They say that's where the jobs are going, she'd said casually, not looking at him directly. The future and all that. Howard had grunted, turning the page of his newspaper. But he'd read the brochure after she went to bed, the unfamiliar terminology swimming before his eyes. Basic, COBOL, Fortran, words from another world. Now he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled brochure. The classes started in January. The GI Bill from his Army service would cover most of the cost. His father's voice echoed in his head. Cleveland makes things, son. Real things. But what did it mean to make something you couldn't hold in your hands? Lines of code on a screen weren't door panels or engine blocks. Could a man like him find value in that? Howard thought about Mike Denton heading to Texas, about the bank letters on his counter, about Audrey's face when he'd told her about the closure. Not surprised, just finally hearing the truth she'd already known. He folded the brochure carefully and put it back in his pocket. Then he turned off the car engine and stepped out into the snow. The admissions office was warm after the parking lot's chill. A woman looked up from her desk, surprise crossing her face at the sight of Howard in his work clothes, snow melting on his shoulders. "Can I help you?" she asked. Howard Fisher, who had defined himself by making things with his hands for his entire life, took a breath and stepped into the unfamiliar future. "I'd like some information about your computer courses," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but he said them anyway. By spring of 1981, the numbers told the story better than any words could. Unemployment in Cleveland at 13.2%. 35,000 auto jobs gone. The city's population declining by 1,000 people per month, an exodus of the skilled and the hopeless alike. Howard sat at a computer terminal in the community college lab, surrounded by machinery as unfamiliar to him as the surface of the moon. His calloused fingers still fumbled with the keyboard, but less than they had in January. Next to him, a kid half his age was flying through the programming assignment. Howard fought down the impulse to walk out, to go back to the unemployment line, to anything that felt more like the life he'd known. Instead, he hunched forward, pecking out code with determined precision. The same focus that had made him stopwatch on the line. One line at a time, each one exact. When his program finally ran without errors, the green text scrolling across the black screen, he felt a small spark of something he hadn't experienced in months. Not pride exactly, but possibility. That evening, he and Audrey sat at their kitchen table, bills spread between them. The mortgage was 4 months behind now. The car payment overdue. Each envelope a judgment on the life they couldn't afford anymore. "We could sell the house," Audrey said quietly. "My sister said we could stay with them until..." Until what? Until Cleveland's factories roared back to life? Until Howard was worth 67 cents a pound again? Howard looked at his wife's face, really looked at it for the first time in months. The new lines around her eyes. The determination in the set of her mouth. Audrey Nash had married a factory worker 16 years ago, had built her life around the certainty of what that meant. Now she was married to an unemployed, middle-aged man taking computer classes with kids just out of high school. Yet there was no reproach in her eyes. Only a steady patience that shamed him. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about Columbus." Audrey's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That company that came recruiting last week. The one that's hiring programmers for their new office." Howard paused. "They're offering relocation assistance." The words hung in the air between them. Leaving Cleveland, the city where both their families had lived for generations. Where Howard's grandfather had arrived from Pennsylvania to build automobiles. Where they'd assumed they would grow old. "Columbus," Audrey repeated, testing the shape of it. It wouldn't be forever, Howard said, though he didn't believe it. Just until things turn around here. Audrey reached across the table and took his hand. His programmer's hand, the calluses slowly softening, the muscle memory of the assembly line gradually fading. When would we go? She asked. The simple question, not if, but when, broke something open in Howard's chest. A dam he'd built against the future, against change, against the truth that his father had been wrong. Cleveland wouldn't provide for him anymore. The life he'd been promised was gone. June, he said, after I finish the certification. Audrey nodded, squeezing his hand. June, she agreed. That night, Howard dreamed of the factory. The familiar rhythm of the line, the weight of the pneumatic drill in his hand. But in the dream, the parts moving past him weren't door panels. They were keyboards, screens, circuit boards. Things he didn't fully understand yet. He woke before dawn, Audrey breathing softly beside him. Through the window, he could see the pre-morning darkness over Lake Erie, the faint outline of the silent factories along the shore. Howard Fisher, 39 years old, 205 pounds. The computer classes involved a lot of sitting. Worth, what? He didn't know how to calculate it anymore. The old math no longer applied. He slipped out of bed and went to the desk in the corner of their bedroom where he kept his programming textbooks. Opening one, he began to read in the dim light, his lips moving silently as he worked through the unfamiliar concepts. Line by line, each one exact, building something he couldn't hold in his hands, but something that might carry him forward nonetheless. Outside, Cleveland continued its long, painful transformation, a city learning the same brutal lesson that Howard was learning. That nothing lasts. That change comes whether you're ready or not. That sometimes survival means leaving behind the only life you've ever known. Howard turned the page and kept reading as the first light of morning touched the surface of the lake.